Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Destiny Harris. I am a Black, queer, low-income artist, poet, woman, resistor from the west side of Chicago. And despite how young I might look in comparison to everyone else here, including Bernie, I am in fact 18 years old and of voting age. From a very young age, I became aware of the way in which politics affects the way I exist in the world. At the age of 12, in 2013, I saw Francis Scott Key Elementary, my severely underfunded, predominantly Black elementary school located on the west side of Chicago, get shut down at the end of my 6th grade year. I saw the school my friends attended a few blocks down get closed too. At the age of 12, I was forced to grasp the concept of accountability, questioning the decisions of those in power. Who allowed and approved of the closing of 50-plus schools, most of which were located in what I later to learn to be predominantly Black and Latinx, severely under-resourced communities in Chicago? In 2015, at the age of 14, I saw images of the shooting death of innocent 17-year-old Laquan McDonald blast around the country. I saw his death justified and his character crucified, even as young Black and brown people across the city rose up and demanded justice and a transformation of a racist system that had failed Laquan. Today, I am 18, and the fight against social inequality is in every breath I take, is fueling up my body in resistance in every meal I eat, and resting a bruised voice in every rest I take. About a year ago, I decided to get involved with the campaign called No Cop Academy. A youth-led, adult-supported campaign calling out Rahm Emanuel's proposed $95 million police training facility to be built in the Chicago neighborhood with the lowest per capita income. This is the neighborhood that I live in. This proposed new police training academy comes years after the closing down of 50-plus schools under the claims of the city not having enough money to invest in dilapidated, discarded schools. The proposal of this cop academy comes as a direct response to the shooting of the death of Laquan McDonald. A $95 million cop academy being built on the justification of the Chicago Police Department needing better training, which, let's remember, a building is not the same thing as curriculum. And they claim this building will bring economic development to the west side of Chicago. I didn't know economic development looked like more investment in jails, policing, and mass incarceration. The work I've done with No Cop Academy expands far beyond demanding a shiny new building not be built at the cost of Black and brown lives. We've been arguing, we've been demonstrating that real community safety is about investing. It's about investing in our schools, in our clinics, in our youth. Real community safety is about recognizing that the police, with however much training or reform they get, will not free Black and brown people. It means acknowledging the fight against the Cop Academy is a fight against many issues plaguing America. It looks like highlighting and calling out the great economic inequalities that exist in communities of color around the country, and acknowledging the overlap between classism and racism, being Black and poor, and how the government institutions contribute to the racial wealth gap. It means realizing The fight against the police academy is also a fight against the eventual displacement of residents, the rising prices of rents, the removal of affordable housing, and resistance against housing discrimination. The No Cop Academy campaign has also taught me that elected officials alone can't save us. Only we can when we build strong movements and demand change and make it possible. I'm here today because I personally seen the ways that Bernie's fight against housing segregation in the 60s, that Bernie's fight against the homogeny of white folk in Hyde Park, that Bernie's fight against the homogeny of white folk in Hyde Park and against the University of Chicago is a fight that never went away, only evolved. Decades later, the University of Chicago is still displacing Black, Latinx, and poor people, and a community benefits agreement for the Obama Presidential Center is something that local residents are still fighting for. I've learned that a campaign can speak to a multitude of social justice issues such as the demilitarization of the police, criminal justice reform, ending mass incarceration, investing in schools, and ending displacement all at the same time. I've learned that when we build movements that make bold and visionary calls, there are politicians such as Bernie who will be willing to stand on the side of justice when it comes to addressing each issue, no matter the cost. Our country is currently in a very vulnerable state. Everyday people are having to prove their existence and their humanity. The current state of affairs is dangerous. We are in desperate need of a president who is willing to stand on the side of justice and prove their commitment to it. We are in desperate need of someone who has not only promised justice, but has practiced it. We've seen Senator Bernie practice justice, and I hope we all continue to put justice into practice by backing the candidates who can bring about the most transformative change and continuing to organize to free our communities day in and day out. Thank you.
Welcome award-winning photographer and filmmaker Danny Lyon.
Wow. Hello, Chicago. Hello, University of Chicago. In 1959, I came to Chicago as a student and landed at Midway Airport on a propeller plane. There was no O'Hare Airport, and I got off and stood on the tarmac. I lit a cigarette and vomited. Because I didn't smoke. They called me last night, and I said, "What do you want me for?" And they said, "Because you went to school with Bernie." And my buddy Ira Churgan, whose father was a grocer in Brooklyn, went to high school with Bernie. And in the summer, Ira went to look for an apartment, and he knew Bernie was coming to the University of Chicago, and he said, Bernie, I'm on the phone, Bernie, I found an apartment. And they got a big room and a little teeny room about the size of a bathroom. And Bernie says, great, I'm going to live with you, Ira. So Ira said, well, I'm going to flip a coin. And Ira flipped that coin, and Bernie got the little bitty room. But he didn't care. Bernie cared about bigger things than his own personal comfort. And I became the campus photographer. And I took pictures of everything. And the next year, a friend of mine, Bob McNamara, who was in CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, he came to me and said, Danny, you got to come see this. Bring your camera. And I went over to the administration building, and you couldn't get into the chancellor's office because students, led by Bernie, were sitting down and blocking the entrance to the chancellor of the University of Chicago. The chancellor's name was Dr. George Beadle, and he had won a Nobel Prize, and they shut down his office because the University of Chicago discriminated in all the housing it owned all around Hyde Park in the house. And Bernie couldn't stand for it, and he led the students in that sit-in. And I have pictures to prove it. And I stood in that room, and it was crowded. I took pictures of the kids and students and Bernie and his buddies and revolutionaries all huddled in conversation. And I said to myself, the real action is in the South. And 6 months later, I hitchhiked to Cairo, Illinois. I was 20 years old. And I was about to make the greatest collection of pictures of the Southern Civil Rights Movement made by anybody. And the first picture on the first frame, on the first roll of bulk-loaded film shows John Lewis, today Congressman Lewis, sitting there. And John led a protest, and he kneeled down and prayed, and I took a picture, and we made a poster saying, "Come, let us build a new world together." I was invited to dinner at Dr. Beadle's house because I was a campus photographer, and James Baldwin was there. I met James Baldwin. And I was in Selma, Alabama, 3 years before John was beaten there, with James Baldwin. And he said, "You know, I've never seen anything like this before." And I thought, what? James Baldwin, who was from Harlem, New York City, had never seen what was going on in the South, and he hadn't. So I became the SNCC photographer. And John said, "Go down south," and I went down to Albany, Georgia. I got arrested, and I was in jail with Dr. King. Chicago was a hotbed of activism. Chicago had the biggest support groups for SNCC. Chicago had Bernie. I was a history student. History is written by the winners. History is what we think happened a long time ago. You know, when they did that sit-in, people didn't care. No one patted Bernie on the back. when John Lewis was in Cairo, no one cared. There was no press there. No one cared about these little demonstrations. But that demonstration that he led was the first sit-in to take place anywhere in the North. It took place in January of 1962. All these little demonstrations led by people like Bernie, who did it because they believed in justice. They believed in the idea, written by Thomas Jefferson of all people, that all men are created equal. Think of that. This strange man created an idea that we all believed in, that I believed in high school, and Bernie believed in, and we still believe in. 18 months after Bernie led that sit-in, 14,000 young people like yourselves were arrested in the South. It was called the Firestorm. It was the high water mark of the Southern Civil Rights Movement. And another 3 years after Bernie led that sit-in, John Lewis was beaten down on the Selma Bridge. And by then, we had won. We had won part one of the study of the struggle for justice in the United States. Part one of making all men equal. When I was young, if someone came up to me and said, "You want to hear about World War I would have laughed. Young people don't want to know about history. Young people want to make history. I love you. Goodbye.
And now, local activist and youth leader with the Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Ashley Galvin Ramos.
Why am I wearing this sweater? Well, here's my story. My name is Ashley Galvan Ramos, and I am the youth representative on the board of Logan Square Neighborhood Association. I lived in Logan Square all my life, and I thought I was going to stay for the rest of my life. Logan Square was the only place I knew. It was and still is my home. A year ago, my family and I found out our landlord was selling the building where we were living through our neighbors. They came up to us and asked if we knew if the building was sold. We looked at each other, confused but mainly scared. Our landlord came to visit us that day and introduced to us the new owner of the building. We tried to see if we could get at least a month to pack and find a place. The new owner agreed, but we were to stay longer than that. We would have to pay $1,500 for the rent, where we would pay $800 for the exact same apartment. On March 31st, my family was moving. That was also the day of my sister's scheme sis. Instead of celebrating her day, we were packing the U-Haul. We were packing our lives. For a couple of weeks, my family and I were homeless. We didn't know where to go. We were lucky enough to find family friends who let us live in their basement. A basement that didn't feel like home. We felt very restrained. My mom still had to travel to Logan Square for work, and I gave up on school. During the time I was supposed to be in school, I was walking around the neighborhood to look for an apartment. At the time, my life looked really dark and helpless. But without my connections with LSNA, my parents and I would not be homeowners today. Even though we have a new home, the feeling of being displaced still lingers. And that's why I'm proud to be here with all of you today. My story is only one out of the many who have been affected by gentrification. My youth at LSNA have been working hard to find a solution to stop gentrification in our communities beyond Logan Square. My youth and other youth groups in the city are learning about problems that are happening in our city right now. They are uniting and going up to people empowered to be heard, and they will be heard. We need to hold our leaders accountable. Senator Sanders is a rare leader who does the right thing even when we don't notice. Whenever you see those votes in the Senate where there are only a handful of senators voting to protect working people, you always know Bernie is one of those votes. At the time, we have a racist president. We need a new president who has had the experience fighting on the front lines of that civil rights struggle. Bernie Sanders would be that president. As a young man, he was part of the civil rights movement, protesting against housing discrimination, and he put his body on the line to protest school segregation. This leadership is what we need in order to survive. We need this leadership to keep our community ours. This campaign is bigger than any one place or region. This is a campaign about uniting the entire country to defeat Donald Trump and transform this country into the compassionate, progressive country we know it can be. This is about creating America that provides equitable opportunities, create equitable justice under the law, and extends equal rights to all. Thank you.
Now, we would like to introduce you to our 3 campaign co-chairs of Bernie 2020. First, please welcome co-founder of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream and campaign finance activist, Ben Cohen.
Wow. Chicago is rocking tonight. You guys are looking good. And you sound good. It's an honor to be here on this stage with the people who have come before me. You know, before Bernie, I used to be the most famous guy from Vermont. So it's with great pride and joy that I give that mantle up to Bernie. Ice cream is good. But a president of the United States that truly stands for justice in all its flavors That is euphoric. And that's why I'm here with you tonight in Chicago instead of being back home in Vermont licking ice cream. You know, euphoria is a high-minded word. But the reason Bernie will be able to transform Washington is that he's down to earth. He has a vision, and it's pretty basic. He believes that the United States should work to improve the lives for everyday people. You're a very supportive crowd, instead of corporations and the ultra-wealthy. He knows what he's up against. He has no delusions. He's been in the trenches, in the cesspool of what is our political system today. And that's what will enable him, with the help of all of us, to finally flush the crap down the drain. You know, I don't see Bernie as a politician in the normal sense of the word. He is a fighter for justice, social, racial, and economic. And he uses politics as a means to that end. You know, before Bernie, I never had a mayor that represented my values, or a congressman, or a senator. And I can tell you that it feels really good. So I just want to give you a taste of what has gotten me so excited about seeing this guy in the White House. I am going to be the Minister of Ice Cream. For the last 40 years, I've been Bernie's constituent. I've seen how steadfast and determined and focused he is. For these last 4 decades, he has worked consistently to improve the lives of regular, everyday people and those who are oppressed. You know, way back in 1980, when Ben & Jerry's was just starting out, Bernie won an improbable victory over an old incumbent machine crony politician, and he became mayor of Burlington, Vermont. His first act was to shut down plans for expensive condominiums that would have privatized the lakeshore of Lake Champlain. And instead, he opened up a park that made it open to everybody. When he became my congressman, he personally took busloads of senior citizens across the border into Canada so that they could buy their prescription drugs at real prices. He co-founded the Progressive Caucus in the House, which has now become the biggest values-led caucus. He voted against NAFTA before being against NAFTA was cool. He voted against going to war in Iraq twice. And then in 2007, he defeated the richest man in Vermont to become my senator. As a senator, he worked with conservatives to force the first ever audit of the Federal Reserve Bank, which revealed $16 trillion in ultra-low interest loans to big banks and numerous instances of conflicts of interest after the financial collapse of 2008. Then he led a successful effort to stop the so-called chain CPI, and that enabled recipients of Social Security and veterans to continue to receive the benefits that they deserve. And last September, Bernie introduced the Stop Bezos Act. That stands for Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies. It requires large corporations that pay lousy wages, that force their employees to use Medicaid and food stamps in order to get by, to reimburse the federal government for those costs. A month later, Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. You know, when Bernie ran for president the first time and said he wouldn't take any big money, I thought it was a mistake, that he would never be able to raise enough money to be competitive. And then I came to understand it. He knew that if there weren't enough small dollar donors to get him into office, that he would never have the army of people that would be necessary to enable him to accomplish the big changes that he needs once he gets there. So, what do I think about Bernie, the man? Well, he's always been the same. He never wavers. He has a clear vision of how to make America kind again. He's not a fancy guy. He's pretty down home, no airs. And I like his hairstyle. That never changes either. He doesn't go with the trends, he sets the trends. Small donor-funded campaigns, universal health care, publicly funded colleges and universities. Bernie, the trendsetter? Who knew? He's already leading the country. Just look at all the other candidates that are following him. Thank you very much. It's been great to be here with you, Chicago.
Next, give a warm welcome to Congressman Ro Khanna.
Bernie Sanders has a simple moral vision for America's future. Instead of spending $6 trillion on endless wars. We need to invest in healthcare, in education, in infrastructure, in clean energy, in every community across America. Bernie Sanders doesn't just talk about these things, he delivers. He didn't just talk about ending the war in Yemen. Listen up. It's important. Listen up. He passed, in the first time in the history of the United States, the first time ever, a war power resolution through the Senate to end the civil war in Yemen. That's about saving lives. 14 million Yemenis who face possible famine. But let me tell you, it's more than that. Yemen is a precedent for a simple principle: no more unconstitutional wars. And I know when Bernie Sanders is president, he will not get us into a single war without congressional authorization. Bernie Sanders doesn't just talk about raising wages, he delivers. When he introduced the Stop Bezos Act, you guys remember that? 3 weeks later, Jeff Bezos raised wages for 350,000 Americans across this country. Here's my question. If Bernie Sanders in the minority in the Senate can get 350,000 Americans a raise, imagine what he will do when he's president of the United States. Bernie Sanders doesn't just talk about Medicare for all because it's fashionable. The movement he led with all of you led to the majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives being for Medicare for all. And with his leadership, we will finally get a vote in the House and the Senate for Medicare for all and get that passed. Let me end with this. The volume of our politics has gotten loud. There are a lot of people who talk, but what we need is people who think and do. The president loves to talk and talk and talk. 2 hours yesterday. But at a time when people are cynical about government, when they're weary of promises broken, when they crave more substance and conviction in our politics, we need someone whose life experience speaks for itself. We need someone who has had a lifetime of integrity to reclaim our democracy. That person is Bernie Sanders. Thank you.
Finally, please welcome to the stage Senator Nina Turner.
Chicago, Chi-Town in the house. Oh my God. Can I just say that it's Sunday? Can I just say, oh my God? It's so amazing to join you tonight. I love you too, darling. So amazing to join you tonight. And for every speaker and to the co-chairs, and I got to give a shout out to Mayor Cruz from San Juan, Puerto Rico. She's one of our co-chairs and she's back at home, so I got to give her a shout out. Chicago, the revolution is here tonight. And we are here because you are here. We are here because the needs are here. And we are here because the opportunities are here. You know, Sister Destiny did that thing. I was back there and I told her, well, she took all my notes. And I got to shout out Tommy's Reunion Choir. Didn't they do that? They did that. As my two co-chairs, Brother Ben and Congressman Rowe, laid out why it is so important that at this momentous moment in our history, that we aim for not only half measure, but we aim for transcendence. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Chi-Town. And he came here in the 60s. And you see, this history is important. You know, there's a lot of folks out there talking about, why are you talking about his history? Why do you talk about history? I talk about history because Brother James Baldwin put it this way. He said, know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there is virtually nowhere that you cannot go. Our history matters. How we got here matters. So in the 1960s, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his contemporaries, there were other folks helping the man do this work, but he recognized that in the slums of Chicago, that African-American folks in this city, in this state, were treated like second-class citizens. He understood the call, the differences between the North and the South, and what was necessary to do in the North to bring nonviolent civil disobedience to this city. He understood that. And he also understood this, and I want this to be the very foundation of what I have to say here tonight. Just as I said to our sisters and brothers in Brooklyn, I say to you that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said this. He said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where they stand in times of comfort and convenience. It is where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. The measure of a man. In Chi-Town, I say to you, as the speakers before me have laid out the measure of the man by the name of Bernard Sanders. See, where we hail from, what we come from, what we do matters. And if I might, if I may, because I am the daughter of a preacher, and today is Sunday, in the Christian tradition, it says the following: you shall know the tree by the fruit that it bears. I am here to tell you that Senator Bernie Sanders bears good fruit, righteous fruit, the fruit of justice. Being a first-generation college graduate at the University of Chicago, he understands what the movement for civil rights, for racial justice and equality means. He was in that fight. But it's not just about what he did way back then. When some of you in this room were not even born, it is also about what he does right now in this moment with the power that he has. He could have easily, sisters and brothers, I want you to hear me, he could have easily stopped his work after the campaign in 2016, but he did not do that. This is the man who was on the front line with striking Verizon workers. This is the man who stood up with the Marriott workers. This is the man who stood up to Amazon and said, you will pay $15 an hour. This is the man who told Disney that you are not so much the happiest place on earth until you pay your workers $15 an hour. This is the man who in 2017, and I was there with him, and Brother Danny Glover was there with him, and Brother and our NAACP brother Cornell Brooks was there with him when he marched on Mississippi in Canton, Mississippi to support Nissan workers who were trying to unionize with the UAW. This is the man. The ultimate measure of a man is where he stands in times of controversy and challenge. And sisters and brothers, can I just tell you, in the early 2000s, if I may, when he was a congressman and he got word that IBM was going to cut the pensions of older voters by 50%, and he stood up with Congressman Dennis Kucinich from the great state of Ohio, and he purchased 5 shares of stock. Now, I want you to wrap your minds around this. I want you to just wrap your minds around this. A congressman from Vermont went to Cleveland, Ohio, to stand by the side of Congressman Dennis Kucinich. He wanted to speak at the stockholders' meeting, but in order to speak at the meeting, he had to purchase shares to do it, to stand up for older workers whose pensions were going to be cut in half, the ultimate measure of a man. And sisters and brothers, we got the receipts. We got all kinds of receipts. So let me just say this to you, because I'm feeling this thing. They didn't give a sister a cordless mic tonight. They said I would be all over the stage. But I just want you to wrap your minds around this. That with these hands, can you raise your hands wherever you are in this space right now? With these hands, we will transform this country. With these hands, we will have Medicare for all. With these hands, we will have college for all. With these hands, we will secure for ourselves and future generations a better life. With these hands, we will have criminal justice reform. With these hands, we will strike down the vestiges of racism and discrimination and homophobia and xenophobia. With these hands. With these hands. And to my otherly abled sisters and brothers. See, we are on assignment. And our mission is so high, we can't get over it. And our mission is so low, we can't get under it. And our mission is so wide, we can't get around it. Be we black or brown or red or white or yellow or the swirl in between, whether we be gay or straight or Jew or Gentile or no religion at all, with these hands, whether we be Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, with these hands, we deserve better, sisters and brothers. So don't let the haters fool you, because haters gonna hate. But it's all right, we got the receipts. So I want you to be committed to this thing, because Senator Sanders cannot do this without us. He is a visionary who has always seen ahead of his time. He was one of only 2 white elected officials in the entire United States of America to back the Reverend Jesse Jackson's run for President of the United States of America with these hands. We're going to do this. And see, people know that we're going to do this, so the haters are going to come, but I want you to ignore them, and I want you to keep your eye on the prize. Because with these hands, we will rise. So before I bring out the man, I want you to recommit yourselves that when you leave here tonight, that you're going to do all that you can. All that you can. I want you to take on the spirit of one of my sheroes, Harriet Tubman, who said these words: if you hear the dogs barking, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. If you want clean water, clean air, clean food, keep going. If we want a system that doesn't treat poverty as a crime, you must. If you want a better country, a better world for yourselves and future generations, you must. And if you dare to dream a bigger dream, you must. And if you know that we are in this fight together, you must. And with these hands, we will elect Senator Bernie Sanders as the next president of the United States of America.
Thank you, Chicago. It is nice to have a gathering with a few friends. A small, intimate, quiet get-together. What a turnout, and thank you so much for being here. Let me thank, the Tommy's Reunion Choir. Let me thank 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 Tina Watson Conley for that great national anthem rendition. Destiny Harris, Danny Lyon, Ashley Galvin Ramos. Let me thank the Ice Cream King from Vermont, Ben Cohn. Let me thank one of the outstanding members of the U.S. Congress, Ro Khanna. And let me thank my fellow political revolutionary, Senator Nina Turner. We are gathered here tonight to complete the political revolution we started 3 years ago. Years ago, they thought we were kind of crazy and extreme. Not the case anymore. 3 years ago, the ideas that we brought forth here in Illinois and all over the country were rejected by Democrats. Not anymore. We have begun the political revolution, and now we're gonna complete it. I want to thank all of you for being part of a campaign which will be unprecedented in modern American history. Our campaign is not only going to win the Democratic nomination, we are not only going to defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history, but with your help, we're going to do more than that. We're not only going to defeat Trump, we're going to transform the United States of America. Nope. No, it ain't Bernie, it is you. It must be you. And the whole point of the political revolution is that nobody, not Bernie or anybody else, can do it alone. We have got to do it together by the millions. Now we're talking. That's right. Together, not me, but together, we are going to finally in this country create an economy and government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Together, we are going to create a political system which is based on the democratic principles of one person, one vote, and end a corrupt political system in which billionaires are buying elections. Today, I want to welcome you to a campaign which says loudly and proudly that the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, kleptocracy, hatred, authoritarianism, and pathological lying. The principles of our government will not be racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and religious bigotry. All of that is going to end. The principles of our government will be based on justice, on economic justice, on social justice, on racial justice, and environmental justice. Today, I want to welcome you to a campaign which tells corporate America, the billionaire class, and the other powerful special interests who control so much of our economic and political life that we will no longer tolerate their insatiable greed. A greed which has resulted in our country having more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth. Now, I understand that it is not talked about too much in Congress or in the media, but in my view, we can no longer stand idly by and allow 3 families in this country to own more wealth than the bottom half of America. We cannot allow CEOs of major corporations to make over 300 times as much as their workers. We cannot allow the very rich to become even richer, while over 20% of our children live in poverty, while veterans who defended this country sleep out on the streets, and seniors cannot afford the medicine they need. We will no longer accept 46% of all new income going to the top 1%, while millions of Americans are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, and over half of our people live paycheck to paycheck. We will no longer accept a situation in which, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, our younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. They will have lower wages, higher debt, unaffordable housing, and less mobility. Now, I've got 4 kids and 7 grandchildren. Downward mobility is not acceptable to me or the American people. Today, we launch the political revolution. But I want you all to be very clear. And it's important that you are understanding what we are up against. This struggle is not just about defeating Donald Trump. This struggle is about taking on the incredibly powerful institutions that control the economic and political life of our country. And I am talking about Wall Street. I am talking about the insurance companies and the drug companies and the fossil fuel industry and the military-industrial complex and the prison-industrial complex. Brothers and sisters, there is too much concentration of wealth and power in this country, and this is a fight we are not going to run away from. We believe in democracy, not oligarchy. Today, we say to the private health insurance companies, whether you like it or not, the United States will join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care to all people as a right. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. And together, we will pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. Today, we say to the pharmaceutical industry that you will no longer charge the American people the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. The result being 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to buy the medicine their doctors prescribe. How crazy is that? Whether they like it or not, the greed of the drug companies is going to end. We're going to lower drug prices in America. Today we say to Walmart and the fast food industry and other low-wage employers, stop paying your workers starvation wages. Yes, we are going to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. It is not a radical idea to suggest that anyone in America who works 40 hours a week should not be living in poverty. And by the way, because we understand that the future of the American middle class is tied into the growth of trade unions, we're going to make it easier for workers to join unions, not harder. Today, we say to the American people that we will rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our rail systems, our subways, our water systems, our wastewater plants, our airports, and affordable housing. And when we do that, when we put our people to work rebuilding this country, we create up to 13 million good-paying jobs. Today, we say to the parents of young children in this country, we understand that 0 through 4 are the most significant ages of a human being, intellectually and emotionally. The children of this country are our future, and we will establish a high-quality, universal pre-K system. Today, we say to the young people that we want you to get the best education that you can, regardless of the income of your family. Good jobs require a good education, and that is why we will make public colleges and universities tuition-free. And we will end the absurdity of millions of our people forced to pay high interest rates on outrageously high student loan debt. America once had the best educated workforce in the world, and we are going to make that happen again. Today, we say to our senior citizens, we understand you cannot survive on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security. My Republican colleagues in the Senate want to cut Social Security benefits. Well, we've got some bad news for them. We are not going to cut Social Security. We're going to expand excellent benefits. Today, we say to Donald Trump and the fossil fuel industry that climate change is not a hoax. But is an existential threat to our country and the entire planet. And we intend to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel into energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And in the process, we will create millions of good-paying jobs. It is clear to me that every one of us has a moral responsibility to make certain that we leave to our children and our grandchildren a planet that is healthy and habitable. That's a moral responsibility. Today we say to the American people that instead of demonizing the undocumented immigrants in this country, We're sick and tired of the demonization. We are going to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship. We are going to provide legal status to the 1.8 million young people eligible for the DACA program. And we are going to create a humane border policy for those who seek asylum. The United States of America must never be a country that snatches tiny babies from the arms of their mothers. Today, we say to the top 1% and the large profitable corporations, people who have never had it so good, that under a Bernie Sanders administration, we're going to end the massive tax breaks and loopholes that you currently enjoy. We will no longer accept the absurd situation where large corporations like Amazon, Netflix, and General Motors pay nothing in federal income tax. We will no longer tolerate a situation in which the wealthy and large corporations store tens of billions of dollars in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens. Together, we are going to end austerity for working families and bring some austerity to corporate America. Today, we say to the military-industrial complex that we will not continue to spend $700 billion a year on the military. And that is more than the next 10 nations combined. We are going to invest in affordable housing. We're going to invest in public education. We're going to invest in rebuilding our infrastructure. We are not going to invest in never-ending wars. I should mention to you that this morning, as it happens, I was in Selma, Alabama, to commemorate the 54th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, when civil rights demonstrators were beaten as they marched to the state capitol. They were beaten, and my congressional colleague, John Lewis, was almost killed in that demonstration 54 years ago because people wanted the right to vote. And I must say that it is incomprehensible to me that in the year 2019, we continue to have a president, a Supreme Court, and Republican governors who still are trying to deny people of color and poor people the right to vote. In the last decade, more than 30 states have considered voter suppression laws whose clear intent is to disenfranchise people of color. How pathetic, how cowardly is that? Together, we will end voter suppression in this country. And move to automatic voter registration. If you are a citizen and 18 years of age, you are registered to vote. End of discussion. And when we talk about civil rights, let me become a little bit personal. As some of you may know, I spent 4 years of my life here in Chicago. In the early 60s as a 20-year-old transfer student to the University of Chicago. Now, I said this before, and I'll say it again, that my 4 years here in Chicago was an extraordinary moment in my life and very much shaped my worldview and what I wanted to do. I should also say that while the University of Chicago was and is an excellent school, the truth is that I learned a lot more off campus than in my classrooms. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to your classes. As someone who came from a working class family that didn't have a lot of money, Chicago provided me, for the first time in my life, the opportunity to put two and two together in understanding how the real world worked, to understand what power was about in this country and who the people were who had that power. Those years enabled me to understand a little bit about how wars get started, to learn about racism and poverty and other social ills. My years here in Chicago gave me the opportunity to become involved in the civil rights movement, in the labor movement, in the peace movement, and in electoral politics. So thank you, Chicago, for that opportunity. As a student at the University of Chicago in the early 60s, I became involved with a civil rights organization called the Congress on Racial Equality Corps, which was one of the leading civil rights groups of that period. Now, some of you may not know this, but in the early 1960s, the University of Chicago owned segregated housing. Being audacious young people, black and white, our chapter of CORE wanted to expose the racist housing system run by the university. And so our CORE chapter did something pretty interesting. We sent white couples and black couples into the university-owned housing to pretend that they were looking for an apartment. And you can guess what happened. When the black couples showed up, there were just no apartments available. Sorry about that, there's nothing available for you. But a few hours later, when one of our white couples went in to look for an apartment, somehow, mysteriously, they found a choice of apartments. After documenting that clear pattern of racial discrimination, the students in CORE demanded that the university desegregate its housing. When they refused, we staged one of the first ever civil rights sit-ins in the North. What we were doing here in Chicago at that time was significant, but it came nowhere close to what young people our age were doing in the South in groups like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We were protesting. They were putting their lives on the line, and some of them, in fact, were murdered. In 1963, I, along with a busload of other students from Chicago, took a 600-mile ride to Washington, D.C. for what remains in my mind an unforgettable day. We went to the nation's capital to participate in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Led by one of the great leaders in American history, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I had the honor of being there to hear him deliver his now famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and that was a day I have never forgotten. But returning home to Chicago, we knew that we had a lot more work to do. At that time, it was 9 years, it had been 9 years since the Brown versus Board of Education decision, Supreme Court decision, that desegregated schools in America. But the school officials here in Chicago at that time had still refused to meaningfully desegregate the city's public schools. Black schools were overcrowded and underfunded, with many students forced to share chairs and desks. Meanwhile, a report at that time found over 380 white classrooms were completely empty. But instead of putting black children in those empty classrooms, the school officials decided to put old trailers. You know what old trailers look like? Put old trailers on the black school grounds. And those trailers were called Willis wagons after the Chicago school superintendent of that time, Mr. Benjamin Willis. Those trailers were a monstrosity. Students would boil in the heat and freeze in the cold. They were infested with rats. They were an insult and a disgrace. And the community fought back. One day, many of us went to the spot where they were planning to put the trailers. We were corralled by the police and told not to cross a line. Well, some of us did cross that line. And, of course, we were arrested. And we spent that night in jail until we were bailed out in the morning by the NAACP. Now, the reason I tell you all of this is because my activities here in Chicago taught me a very important lesson that I have never forgotten. And that is that whether it is the struggle against corporate greed, against racism, sexism, homophobia, environmental devastation, or war and militarism, real change never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. Have we made progress in civil rights in this country since the early 1960s when I lived here in Chicago? And the answer is yes, we have. But do we still have a very, very long way to go to end the institutional racism which permeates almost every aspect of our society? And the answer is absolutely. Two years ago, we turned on our televisions and we saw Nazis marching in Charlottesville. Nazis marching in the streets of the United States. We have in recent years seen a major spike in hate crimes against blacks, against Muslims, against the gay community, against Jews, against Latinos, and other minorities. And over the last number of years, we have seen a terrible level of police violence against unarmed people in the minority community. Laquan McDonald, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Rekia Boyd, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, and many, many others, people of color, killed by police who should be alive today. Furthermore, we know that African Americans are twice as likely to be arrested and almost 4 times as likely to experience physical force in an encounter with the police. Today, black men are sentenced to 19% more jail time for committing the exact same crime as white men, and African Americans are jailed at more than 5 times the rate of whites. All of this and more is why we are finally going to bring about real criminal justice reform in this country. We are going to end the international embarrassment of having more people in jail than any other country on earth. Instead of spending $80 billion a year on jails and incarceration, we are going to invest in jobs and education. No more private prisons and detention centers. No more war on drugs. No more keeping people in jail because they are too poor to afford cash bail. Real police department reform led at the federal level, which says that lethal force is the last resort, not the first. And by the way, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we are going to change a system in which tens of thousands of Americans every single year get criminal records for possessing marijuana, but not one major Wall Street executive went to jail for destroying our economy in 2008. No, they didn't go to jail. They got a $1 trillion bailout. Our campaign, as you know, is about fundamentally ending the disparity of wealth and power in our country when so few have so much and so many have so little. But as we do that, we must end the disparity within the disparity. Today, the average black family has 1/10 the wealth of the average white family. Today, the infant mortality rate in black communities is more than double the rate for white communities, and the death rate for cancer and almost every disease is far higher for blacks. Black women are 3.5 times more likely to die from pregnancy than white women. Today, Flint, Michigan is still without new pipes for clean water. And it's not just Flint. There are thousands of other communities, often minority communities, where the water that people are drinking, the air that people are breathing, is not fit for human beings. Today, redlining prevents black-owned businesses from getting the loans they need, and predatory lending results in higher interest rates in the African American community. Whether it is a broken criminal justice system or massive disparities in the availability of financial services, or health disparities, or environmental disparities, or educational disparities, our job is, and we will, create a nation in which all people are treated equally. Brothers and sisters, over the last several years, you and I and millions of others have stood up and fought for justice from one end of this country to the other, and we have had some successes. Today, as billionaires and large corporations have attacked unions, destroyed pensions, deregulated the banks, and slashed wages, we have succeeded in raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour in state after state and city after city. And we have forced large corporations like Amazon and Disney to do the same, to pay their workers a living wage. And as teachers all over this country have stood up and fought for a decent education for their kids, we have supported them as they went out on strike. Together, as the forces of militarism have kept us engaged in never-ending wars, we have fought back, and for the first time in 45 years, we have utilized the War Powers Act to move us forward in ending the horrific Saudi-led war in Yemen. Together, as so many of our young people have received criminal records for nonviolent offenses, we have fought to end the war on drugs, and we have seen state after state decriminalize marijuana or legalize marijuana. And we are beginning to see communities expunging the criminal records of those arrested on marijuana charges. We have won some victories, but our struggles have certainly not always been successful. But I am here tonight to tell you, because of all of the work that we have done together, we are now on the brink of not just winning an election, but transforming this country. And let me tell you what that transformation will look like when we are in the White House. We will enact a federal jobs guarantee to ensure that everyone is guaranteed a stable, decent-paying job. There is more than enough work to be done in this country. Let's go out and do it and put people in those jobs. When we are in the White House, we will attack the problem of urban gentrification, and we will build the affordable housing this country desperately needs. When we are in the White House, we will end the decline of rural America, reopen those rural hospitals that have been closed, support family-based agriculture, and make sure that our young people have decent jobs so that they do not have to leave the small towns they love and where they grew up. When we are in the White House, we will move aggressively to end the epidemic of gun violence in Chicago and in this country. And the NRA notwithstanding, we are going to pass common sense gun safety legislation. When we are in the White House, we are going to protect a woman's right to control her body. That is not a decision for the federal government or the state government or the local government. That is a woman's choice and nobody else's. Brothers and sisters, we have an enormous amount of work in front of us, and the path forward will not be easy because the big money interests will do everything they possibly can to protect their financial interests. And they have an unlimited amount of money at their disposal. But it is an interesting point to make, that they may have an unlimited amount of money, but we have something they don't have and never will have, and that is a united people. And this is what I believe from the bottom of my heart. And that is, if we do not allow Trump and his friends to divide us up, if we stand together as black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American, if we stand together as gay and straight, if we stand together as native born and immigrant, if we stand together as women and men, if we stand together, if we stand together, urban and rural, north, south, east, and west, if we understand that there really is no such thing as a red state or a blue state, but that we are a nation in which in every single state, the majority of working people are struggling hard to provide a decent life for their kids. If we stand together, believing in justice and human dignity, if we believe in love and compassion, the truth is, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. Let us go forward together. Thank you.